So let's take a look at uh, at, at Rigveda. Now, one of the most important things that is to be kept in mind while thinking about Rigveda, that it's one of the ancient texts, uh, probably one of the oldest in Indian subcontinent, somewhere around 1500 BC. That's almost like 3500 to onwards. So we cannot exactly pinpoint when it was composed. And is believed by historians, most of them, that this text was composed in India by people who came from Central Asia, the nomadic pastoralists from steppes who called each others Aryans. And this is one of the ideas, this is one of the historical beliefs that is questioned by nationalist historians. And not conclusive evidence is lacking on the side of both the parts, but many people who take combined genetics, uh, archaeology, and philology and linguistics, they come to certain conclusion that these texts, Rigveda is one of the most ancient texts of the Aryans, and it consists of mantras, right? And mantra is a kind of prayer or a chant to various kinds of gods, and those gods are not the ones that Hindus worship these days. Yeah. So the Rigveda is considered to be most sacred text among Hindus, and it's believed to be eternal, right? And it is not composed by any human being. It is Apurushaya and Sanatana, means there is no composer that it can have, and that's why it's perfect. It's untouched by human mind, right? It's a not product of human mind. It's a product of higher force, right? And so this text is considered to be the most sacred, and it's one of the key texts of the entire Vedic corpus or the Vedic body of literature, which consists of samhitas, that is the texts which consists of mantras, and the brahmanas, which consist of elaboration, exegesis of the rituals. And the brahmanas would consist of something like aranyaks also. Aranyaks are those discussions about Vedic rituals, about how to conduct them, and finally it consists of something called Upanishads, which is a body of speculations of great philosophical depths regarding self and reality and ultimate nature or purpose of life, and all these large philosophical questions form the bulk of Upanishads. So Vedic corpus consists of these two elements, mantra and Brahman, right? Brahman consists of exegesis and philosophical speculations. And this everything together is considered the Vedic text, and it's considered to be Shruti tradition, Shruti and Sunnah. So the composers of Vedic texts are the rishis who have heard these mantras, right? Samhitas are the basic texts, Jaswin, right? And there are four basic samhitas. Samhita yani saath mein bandha hua. Four basic texts are Rigved, Atharvaved, Yajurved, and Samaved. Some people consider only three Veda, but some people consider even Atharva Ved as one of the Ved. So these are called samhitas, and it consists of chants and mantras, right? While the rest of the Vedic corpus, mostly in prose, is philosophical exegesis or even how to go about uh, conducting Vedic rituals accurately and perfectly at the right time, right? So what do they mean, and so on and so forth. Uh, so that is called Brahmanas. So four Samhitas and their Brahmanas and the Upanishads. This is what is Vedic corpus. Now later on, after during the phase of second urbanization, right? That is the beginning of Mahajanapadas, probably 6th century before Christ, almost 2,600 years before. You find a new kind of formation around Vedic literature, and that is called the Sutra, and Vedanga were developed of all kinds about how to uh, about various aspects of Vedas, right? Like say for example, Shiksha was one of the Vedang about how to utter or pronounce or chant the Vedic mantras accurately, right? So it's a kind of phonetics for phonetic accuracy, and it was so rigorous that a person in Kashmir and a person in Gujarat and a person in uh, South India would chant the Vedic mantras in exactly the same way. So these are the rules for pronunciation. It was called Shiksha. Then you have Jyotish, which is about right time for doing the Vedic sacrifice. So entire Vedic literature is around one major Vedic institution of Yagna, right? Yagna is the core institution of Vedic culture, and around that you have sacrifices of all the kinds, right? So Yagna, and the gods that they are addressing are gods like Indra, Agni, Varun, uh, Ashwin Kumars, and a lot of them which are not popular today, right? Uh, so that is the Vedic culture for you. Now what we are going to do uh, is take a look at how it sounds and reads, right? So I'm going to give you a kind of taste of how a Vedic chant is chanted, right? Along with its Hindi translation, and we will read the English translation as well, right? So Hindi translation will be part of that chanting. So I want you to pay attention to a text, right? And I will put the English translation. I will share that screen with you. Okay. Can you see the screen here? And this is what I have sent out in your email material that I have emailed, right? So people who are hunting for अरे इसके पर material कहाँ है तो मैंने भेजा है उसमें ही आपको मिलेगा. Okay, so let's look at this sukta called the Nasadiya Sukta, which is about creation of this universe, right? And the source and the origin of this universe. And it's one of from the 10th mandala, that is the chapter of Rigved, 129th mantras. Sukta is called a Purusha Sukta. Sukta is a kind of series of mantras which are having a common theme, and they are categorized as part of a chapter, mandala. So can you see this English with screen in front of you? Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now I will show you how it is chanted. Can you hear this? Is it audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
न मृत्युरादिदमृतं न तर्हि न राजा अनादि प्रकेता सृष्टि मृत्युरादिदमृतं न तर्हि न राजा अनादि प्रकेता सृष्टि.
So this was Nasadiya Sukta in Sanskrit. Now we will look at its Hindi version.
सृष्टि से पहले सत नहीं था, असत भी नहीं, अंतरिक्ष भी नहीं, आकाश भी नहीं था, छिपा था क्या, कहाँ, किसने ढका था, उस पल को अगम अकल जल भी कहाँ था. नहीं थी मृत्यु की अमरता भी नहीं, नहीं था दिन रात भी नहीं, हवा भी नहीं, सांस थी स्वयमेव फिर भी, नहीं था कोई कुछ भी, परम तत्व से अलग या परे भी. मन में बीज पहला जो उगा, आम बनकर बढ़ जगा, कवियों ज्ञानियों ने जाना, असत और सत का निकट संबंध पहचाना, पहले संबंध के किरण दाग तिरछे, परम तत्व उस पर ऊपर या नीचे, था बटा हुआ, पुरुष और स्त्री बना हुआ, पर्दा का वही मौका नीचे बचना चला हो गया. सृष्टि पुस्तक दिलं ना, ते सोमवार मिळेल का परत पाहिजे फुटनोट मध्ये टाकायचं आणि व्हिडिओ हा मध्ये सोमवार राईट. तुमच्याकडे घरी काय
इथेच आहे
ना,
मी देतो हवा सगळं
सोमवारी तुम्हाला
घेऊन ये परत.
कारण ते नाटकाविषयी खूप भारी आहे.
बरोबर.
पहिल्याच मी तुम्हाला लिहून
हा चालेल तसं चालेल.
मला एक कागद मिळेल त्यातून घेऊ.
हा एक शीट घे.
चांगलं आहे दुसरं
Yeah, can you see this English version of what you heard? This is the screen I'm sharing. Is it visible? Can you see this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So would anyone like to read this out? Who would like to volunteer and read this? This is an English translation of what you heard. So first was Sanskrit followed by Hindi, and this is English version of it, right? So this is the famous Nasadiya Sukta, which is beginning of the term is called Nasat, which means it does not, or what it is, right? So that's how it is. So you have to start reading from here. So who will start? Who will volunteer?
Sir, can
I
I?
want someone to. Yes, you can.
Then there was neither. Sir, my double voice is coming.
Now?
Then there was neither what is not, nor what is. There was neither space, nor the sky beyond it. What moved here, there, where, under whose protection, What was water, deep and fathomless? Then there was neither death nor immortality. There was no sign to tell night from day. That one breathed without wind by its own power. Nothing else was there beyond it. In the beginning, darkness was swathed in darkness. All this was water all around, without any distinction. The life principle to be born, hitherto concealed in the void, arose as one through the power of heat. In the beginning there was calm desire which arose above all, which was the first seed of mind. Wise men, searching by the force of mind, found the bond of being in non-being. Right across extended their dividing line. Was there a below? Was there an above? There were the planters of seed, there were powers, there was self-will below, active force above. Who indeed knows it? Who will proclaim it? Whence has this world come? Whence is this creation? The gods came later after the creation. Who knows then from where it has arisen? This creation, from where it came, whether it was made, whether it was not made. The one who oversees this in the highest heaven, perhaps he knows, or he too does not.
Yes. So what do you make of it? Quick responses. Anyone wants to say something about this? What is it about, and what is it trying to say? What do you make of it?
Sir, may I?
Yes.
I mean, it's in a very skeptical and almost agnostic tone.
Right.
It doesn't claim to say anything or make any
Yeah.
claims. Rather, it's just asking questions as if,
Right.
in a state of wonder.
Right. Exactly. So it's a kind of response of wonder, and it's there is no kind of settled principle or settled proposition that others are supposed to accept blindly. Right. It's a set of questions, and it also says that this creation, if you look at the last part of it, last part of it is this creation from where it came, whether it was made, whether it was not made. The one who oversees this in the highest heaven, perhaps he knows, or he too does not know. Right? So it does not give a kind of categorical answer, but it's a kind of beginning of inquiry about the origins of reality and origins of this universe. So it's one of the creation hymns, right? That's the technical term, and you will find in almost all religious practices, creation hymns are very important. In some way, they talk about how the universe came about. So if you look at the first mantra of this, then there was neither what is not nor what is. There was neither space nor the sky beyond it. Who moved there? Here, there, where? Under whose protection? What was water, deep and fathomless? So it opens a kind of inquiry about a past when there was neither the things that existed nor the things that did not exist. Right? Being and non-being, even before being and non-being happened. Right? So that is the point of origin that they are talking about. That was the point where there was neither death nor immortality, right? There was no sign to tell night from day. And it was that moment when the one, right, breathed without mind, by its power, nothing else was there beyond it, it, right? In the beginning, darkness was swathed in darkness. All this was water all around, without any distinction, life principle to be born. Hitherto concealed in the void, arose as one through power of heat. In the beginning, there was calm, right? Desire which arose above all, which was the first seed of mind, right? So one of the mantras says that calm or sexual desire is the seed of mind. And wise men who use this force of mind found a bond of being and non-being, right? So wise men, when they speculate and philosophize about their own experience of truth, where they find being and non-being, this power is the power of sexual desire, right? So you can see. So as Jaswin has rightly pointed out, it's extremely skeptic. It's not strictly religious as well. It's not about worship of God as Ganpati or Krishna or like that, right? It's about speculation, philosophizing about the origins of the universe, right? And this is one of the most important suktas in the Vedas, called the Nasadiya Sukta. Okay, now let us look at another very famous sukta, right? And it is called the Purusha Sukta, right? Purusha means man, but not as male so much, but Purusha as man is conceived as a person of gigantic forms, right? This is one of very powerful, very influential sukta. And what is interesting in this, that in some sense it also then goes on to talk about the origin of the structure of the society, that is the caste Varna society. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen regarding Purusha Sukta. So you will hear it being recited. And then we'll read its English translation. Okay. Okay. Can you see this?
Excellence is a never-ending.
So we are going to look at Purusha Sukta, right?
Namaskara. The Purusha Sukta from the 10th Prashna, 13th Anuvaka of Taittiriya Aranyaka. The Purusha Suktam also appears in other Vedas as well. Usually, this is the first Suktam a student of Vedic studies will start with while learning the Vedas. At this juncture, I would like to thank my gurus who have helped me learn the Vedas. Though I am a finance professional with the various qualifications, the concepts of पुरुषः सहस्राक्षः सहस्रपात् स भूमिं विश्वतो भृत्वा अत्यतिष्ठद्दशाङ्गुलम् पुरुष एवेदगुं सर्वम् यद्भूतं यच्च भव्यम् उतामृतत्वस्येषानः यदन्नेनातिरोहति एतावानस्य महिमा अतो ज्यायागश्च पूरुषः पादोऽस्य विश्वभूतानि त्रिपादस्यामृतं दिवि त्रिपादोर्ध्व उदयेत् पुरुषः पादोऽस्येह भवात् पुनः ततो विश्वं व्यक्रामत् सा शनानशने अभि तस्मात् विराजजायत विराजो अधिपूरुषः स जातो अत्यरिच्यत पश्चात् भूमिमथो पुरः यत्पुरुषेण हविषा देवा यज्ञमतन्वत वसन्तो अस्यासीदाज्यम् ग्रीष्म इद्भः शरद्धविः सप्तास्यासन् परिधयः त्रिसप्तसमिधः कृताः देवा यज्ञम् तन्वानाः अबध्नन् पुरुषं पशुम् तैयज्ञम् बर्हिषि प्रौक्षन् पुरुषं जातमग्रतः तेन देवा अयजन्त साध्यार्षयश्च ये तस्मात् यज्ञात् सर्वहुतः संभृतं पृषदाज्यम् पशुगुस्ताश्चक्रे वायव्यान् आरण्यान् ग्राम्याश्च ये तस्मात् यज्ञात् सर्वहुतः ऋतः सामानि जज्ञिरे छन्दागुंसि जज्ञिरे तस्मात् यजुस्तस्मादजायत तस्मादश्वा अजायन्त ये केचो भयादतः गावोह जज्ञिरे तस्मात् तस्माज्जाता अजावयः यत्पुरुषं यदभुः कतिधाव्यकल्पयन् मुखं किमस्य कौ बाहू काबूरूपादामुच्येते ब्राह्मणोऽस्य मुखमासीत् बाहुराजन्यः कृतः ऊरू तदस्य यद्वैश्यः पद्भ्रागुं शूद्रो अजायत चन्द्रमा मनसो जातः चक्षुः सूर्यो अजायत मुखादिन्द्रश्चाग्निश्च प्राणात् वायुरजायत नाभ्या आसीदन्तरिक्षम् शीर्ष्णोद्यौ समवर्तत पद्भ्याम् भूमिर्दिशश्रोत्रात् तथा लोकागम् अकल्पयन् वेदाहमेतम् पुरुषम् महान्तम् आदित्यवर्णम् तमसमस्तु पारे सर्वाणि रूपाणि विचित्य धीरः नामानि कृत्वाभिवदन् यदास्ते धाता पुरस्ताद्यमुदा जहार शक्रः प्रविद्वान् प्रतिशश्चतस्रः तमेवम् विद्वानमृत इह भवति नान्यः पन्था अयनाय विद्यते यज्ञेन यज्ञमयजन्त देवाः तानि धर्माणि प्रथमान्यासन् ते हनाकम् महिमानः सचन्ते यत्र पूर्वे साध्याः सन्ति देवाः अभ्यः सम्भूतः पृथिव्यैरसाच्च विश्वकर्मणः समवर्तताधि तस्य त्वष्टाविदधद्रूपमेति तत्पुरुषस्य विश्वमाजानमग्रे वेदाहमेतम् पुरुषम् महान्तम् आदित्यवर्णम् तमसः परस्तात् तमेवम् विद्वानमृत इह भवति नान्यः पन्था विद्यते जनाय प्रजापतिश्चरति गर्भे अन्तः अजायमानो बहुधा विजायते तस्य धीराः परिजानन्ति योनिम्
Okay, so that was the chanting of Purusha Sukta, right? And uh, let us take a look at its translation into English so that we understand what it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this again. Okay, so this is the Purusha Sukta. It's one of the few hymns in the Rig Veda dealing with creation of the world again, right? The hymn alludes to a sacrifice in which a man, that is Purush, or the primeval being, the first being, is symbolically offered as a victim. From the limbs of this man arise different things in the world. That's how world was created. The hymn is intended to establish the unity of this world with the original being called Purusha, from which it is produced. This Purusha or man is conceived as a person of a gigantic form with 1,000 heads and 1,000 eyes and 1,000 feet, who cover up the entire earth and still remain above it to some extent. The beings on heaven make up only 1/4 of his. The other 3/4 are in the heaven. From this original Purusha was born Viraj, and from this Viraj another Purusha is born. It is this second Purusha as sacrificial victim that the gods, the sadhyas, and the sages offered a sacrifice. And from that sacrifice in which everything was offered arose clarified butter. From this butter were produced wild animals and the domestic animals, and also the birds who move in air. From various limbs of Purusha arose Brahmana, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, and the Shudra, the moon, the sun, Indra, Agni, and Vayu, the mid region, the heaven, and the earth, and all the directions. So I want one of you to read this out, English translation. Who is willing to volunteer? Will someone volunteer? Jia, would you like to read out?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to read out this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is 10th Mandala, 96th mantras. Sukta. Right. Go ahead.
Sir, I don't have your screen.
You can't see the screen? Can you see the
No.
screen, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So,
Yes, sir. Now I can.
right. Okay. Start reading. 1,000
Yes.
heads. Yeah.
1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet has the Purusha, covering the earth on all sides, be extended 10 fingers beyond it. Purusha alone is his all, whatever has been and whatever will be, and he rules over immortal gods and over what grows with food. Such is his greatness, and greater still than this is Purusha. All creatures are but a quarter of him, his 3/4 are what is immortal in the heaven. With his 3/4 did Purusha rise up, 1/4 of his remains here. With it he traversed on all sides over that which eats and that which does not. From him was Viraj born, from Viraj came Purusha. When born he reigned beyond the earth, behind and before. When the gods performed the sacrifice with Purusha as the offering, spring was its clarified butter, summer the fuel, and autumn the oblation. They ritually sprinkled the Purusha, the firstborn, the sacrifice, with water on the sacred grass. With him the gods, the Amartya's perfected begins, and the sages offered the sacrifice. From that sacrifice in which everything was offered, the melted butter was collected. He made those birds who live in the air, those beasts who live in the forest, and those who live in villages. From that sacrifice in which everything was offered were born the verses and chants. From it arose the meters, the formulas were born. From it arose the horses and those with 2 rows of teeth. Indeed, the cows were born from it, so were the goats and sheep. When they divided the Purusha, in how many parts did they arrange him? What was his mouth called? The 2 arms? What were his thighs and feet called? His mouth was the Brahmana, his arms became the Kshatriya, his thighs the Vaishya, from his foot was born the Shudra. The moon was born from his mind, the sun arose from the eyes, Indra and Agni from the mouth, the wind arose from his vital breath. The mid region the mid region came from his navel, the sky came from his head, the earth from his 2 feet, the quarters from the ear. Thus they set the worlds in order. 7 were the enclosing sticks of this sacrifice. Thrice 7 were the kindling sticks made when the gods offering the sacrifice tied Purusha as the sacrificer's beast. The gods offered the sacrifice with this sacrificial oblation. These were the first norms of sacrifice. Those mighty persons reached the heaven where dwell the perfected beings and gods. The 2 hands, though alike, do not work alike. The 2 cows born of the same mother do not yield the same milk. The heroic deeds of twins are not alike. The person, though kinsmen, do not give alike.
Okay. So you can see that this is another creation myth about how the universe came about, and the theory seems to be that first there was nothing but this Purush, right? And Purush gave birth to everything after he was sacrificed, right? And which Purush was sacrificed? A Purush called Purush born from Viraj, right? There is some Purush called the first Adi Purush. Then you have Viraj, and from Viraj came Purush. And this Purush was sacrificed, which created this whole structure of human world and society, which is based on the Varna system. And these Varnas were theoretically in those days different from caste, because caste has, or Jati has, something to do with your birth, while the Varnas were supposed to be based on the idea of guna and karma, right? So a person who has particular guna and karma will have that kind of social standing. So Brahmana would have certain set of traits, Kshatriya. So the social order was not based on birth, but on people's traits, personality traits, and so on, right? So in this scheme of thing, you can find Brahmanas at the top, Kshatriyas are his hands, Vaishya is our thighs, and from his feet are born Shudras, the servants. So it is during this later phase of Vedic period that this system of Varna comes about, right? And from that, later on, it degenerates into something called Jati. And in Jati, a Brahman is one who is by birth a Brahman, or Kshatriya by birth is Kshatriya. But according to the ancient Vedic belief, that was not the theory, right? So this is something that you have to keep in mind. this sacrifice of Purush in the sacrifice is also the beginning of sacrifice, right? So Purush was tied as a sacrificial beast, and in those days you can see this whole sacrifice institution of sacrifice often sacrifices animals, right? Okay, so this is the Purusha Sukta. Anything that you have to say about this? Anyone who wants to respond to this? कुछ कहना है इसके बारे में आपको? Anyone wants to comment?
Sir, who sacrificed the Purusha?
Purusha was sacrificed by Sadhyas, right? Sadhyas are the perfected beings and the gods. So from the first Purush, gods and everything was born, right? From that first Purush, Viraj was born, and from Viraj, that is another being, right? And from Viraj came Purush. And when gods were performing the sacrifice, they offered this Purush as their offering. And spring was its clarified butter, summer the fuel, the autumn the social oblation, and so on.
Sir, who were they offering this Purush to? The Sadhyas were offering Purush to
That's a
whom?
very, very interesting question. Maybe it's not mentioned here, but maybe the Adi Purush, the first Purush. That is what I speculate, but this is not. I don't know for sure, but that is the most likely thing. And from this Yagna, yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I didn't hear what Visha said.
You can come again. Please repeat.
Sir, what Visha said, I can't hear.
She asked that if Purusha is offered as sacrifice, तो किसके लिए sacrifice किया? To please which god? Right? So we can only believe that it is the first Purusha, जिसमें से विराज आता है और विराज में से दूसरा पुरुष आता है. तो वो जो दूसरा पुरुष था उसे sacrifice किया गया. Now all this is narrative, right? And you can see that this is creation. It also in some way talks about social structure based on Varna. Another important thing about this is the Sanskrit language that you heard here, right, being recited is not the same as classical Sanskrit of Kalidas and Bhas and Bhavabhuti or Ashwagosha. Their Sanskrit was post-Paninian Sanskrit. So Rigvedic Sanskrit precedes Panini, who is the first important grammarian, right? So probably in 3rd, 4th century, we have two important grammarians and philosophers of language named Yaska, who wrote something called Nirukta, which explained how words came about. वेद कौन से वर्ड्स नहीं, सिर्फ वेदों के शब्द कहां से आते हैं, राइट? ओरिजिन ऑफ वैदिक वर्ड्स. एंड पाणिनि who gave the grammar and he codified Sanskrit. Now this standardization and codification of Sanskrit resulted later on in classical Sanskrit, जो कालिदास में मिलती है. तो ये the kind of Sanskrit that you heard just now on YouTube is the older Sanskrit. Right? So these are some of the things that you have to keep in mind. Anything else that you want to say? Anyone wants to say something?
Sir, where did this concept of clarified butter come before the creation of cows?
No idea. Now you can't ask very logical, rational questions to it, right? The reason being these are of hoary antiquity. We are talking of 3500 साल पहले, कम से कम 3500 साल पहले पुराना ये narrative hai, right? So, and probably it has something to do with ritualistic importance of the clarified butter. Ghee is very important component of yagna. So this Purush Sukta also talks about the institution of emergence of yagna, and yagna is at the center of Vedic rituals and Vedic life, right? And the whole structure of Vedic culture is centered around this institution of sacrifice. It's only during the time of Upanishads later on that people would be philosophizing about very big questions, right? Great philosophical questions. So let us take a look at one Upanishadic text, which might interest, which is part of our.
Sir, may I ask something?
Yeah, please go.
सर जैसे आपने बोला कि जो वैदिक संस्कृत है इट्स वेरी डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द क्लासिकल संस्कृत
Yeah.
एंड you also said कि Panini created the whole व्याकरण for Sanskrit, right? So what मतलब जरूरत क्यों थी? I mean the classical Sanskrit, we know that it's different, it's but मतलब if the
Why did he do that? Aise?
yeah.
Answer is very simple. Vedas were composed almost 1500 years before Christ, right? And over the course of 1000 years, most of the Vedic texts were written. 1000 साल में लिखी जाती है, जिसे later Vedic period भी कहा जाता है, which is during the time of the beginning of the second urbanization around Gangetic plains, right? And the rise of Mahajanapadas and Magad later on. So that is around 500 BC. तो 1000 साल में जो वैदिक टेक्स्ट है उसको एक सिस्टमेटाइज करना जरूरी समझा उन्होंने, क्योंकि मोस्ट ऑफ इट इज ओरली कंपोज, ओरली रिमेम्बर्ड एंड ओरली propagated, because people who came from Central Asia did not have a script. Writing script उनके पास था ही नहीं. Writing script उससे पहले जो हरप्पन civilization था उनके पास था, right? Because it was a settled urban civilization, while this is a kind of nomadic agricultural civilization. Nomadic आप समझ रहे हो ना, भटकते लोग. तो वहां से जब सेंट्रल एशिया से आते हैं, कजाकिस्तान से लेकर आज जिसे आप कजाकिस्तान कहते हो, सो दे वांट टू सिस्टमेटाइज दिस टेक्स्ट. तो उसके लिए वेदांग नाम के डिसिप्लिन्स बनाते हैं, एंड दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट ऑफ Indian knowledge traditions, ancient Indian knowledge tradition. These Vedang include Shiksha, that is pronunciation, Chand or metrics, and you can see that this Purush Sukta also talks about the emergence of Chanda, right? Vedic utterances are called Chanda or meters or formulae, right? And you have Jyotish in order to come up with right time and correct time of performing sacrifices and reciting these mantras, right? So Jyotish is another Vedang that emerges, and then you also have Vyakarana and Nirukta. Vyakarana by Panini and Nirukta by Yask. So these 6 disciplines emerge in order to preserve, right, and consolidate the Vedic corpus. It had to be preserved, formalized, structured. And when Panini lays down basic rules of Sanskrit language, then it also becomes a Laukik language, that is language for worldly compositions. Till then, Sanskrit was largely a kind of language used in spiritual and religious purposes and rituals. But then after that, people start composing kavya, that is poetry and literature, after Panini, right? So it's a very important question that you asked, Prisha, because you have to preserve this whole thing explain it. क्योंकि बहुत सालों तक वैदिक मंत्र के अर्थ को important नहीं समझा जाता था. Meaning was not seen as very important. Proper chanting of this mantra would result in its fruit, right? So if you are making a particular kind of chant for pleasing the sun god, like Gayatri mantra, then its meaning was not considered very important in one point. So you need a discipline. You need discipline to explain what it means so that people remember it properly, right? You need to organize its grammatical structures, right? And once you codify, like Panini did, you have the language available to entire population. Till then, it was largely a kind of reserve for religious, spiritual purpose. It was called Deva Bhasha. It was the Bhasha of gods. It was not meant for people. Lok Bhasha, it wasn't the Lok Bhasha. So only after Panini you find Sanskrit turning into Lok Bhasha, so that kings later on started putting up their inscriptions in Sanskrit. वो बहुत late होता है, after the Mauryan Empire. Just take this call. Yeah. So the question that why was it codified was largely to preserve and standardize the Sanskrit, Vedic Sanskrit language, right? So it's a very good question. Any other question?
Sir, matlab, we are reading the English translation of Vedas right now. Okay, so what I wonder is if we translate, first of all, it's Vedic Sanskrit, so I don't know uska studies available hai nahi. I don't have any idea for that. But if we translate one thing from one language to another language, does the meaning change?
It does. For example, when you translate Dev as God, right, that becomes a problem, right? Because there are no equivalents. Languages are ways of thinking and looking at the world. And you come up with approximate equivalents. You cannot come with exact equivalents all the time, right? Because two languages and worldviews are always different. So translation is never a kind of quest for absolute equivalence. It has always to do with approximate equivalences of all kinds. For example, there is no English word for jalebi, right? And there is no Gujarati word for pizza, right? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So languages have their own world views, which cannot be, which don't have equivalence in other languages. So translations have to be seen as attempts to achieve some sort of equivalence rather than achieving that equivalence. However, if there is no translation, you won't be able to read it either, right? ये तो तभी भी संस्कृत है, आप सीख सकते हो, मगर चाइनीज लिटरेचर कैसे पढ़ोगे, या फ्रेंच लिटरेचर, या जर्मन, या जापानीज, तमिल लिटरेचर पढ़ना है तो ट्रांसलेशन तो चाहिए ही, है ना? So translation is always required, but you should not look at translation as always. Translation is never about equivalence. It is almost a search for equivalence rather than having equivalence, right? Good. Any other question?
Sir, these chants that were done for the Vedas, were the melodies of them also somehow consistent throughout the entire time that they were being passed down, or were they changed over the years?
You mean
The vocal
melody?
melodies, yes.
Okay, that's a good question, because you know they had a very codified system of pronunciation called shiksha, and they had this system which I forgot to show you while I was showing this, was that they had certain markers which were on those. Let me show you.
Marichinam pada. Swaminath. Ganana.
Okay, let me share the screen so I can show you. Okay, so can you see this screen? Can you see these marks on the top, Gananam, and on this, right? These are the marks for high pitch and low pitch and medium pitch. So a pitch in which it has to be recited was consolidated by this system of markers of shiksha, so that it would remain quite accurate across time and space. That efforts were made just to make it as accurate and as consolidated as possible. But obviously we are looking at a period of thousands of years, right? And how old are you, Jaswin? 21 years? 19. We are talking of 1900 years and 2300 years. So over that course of time, the pronunciation system would change, right? But the efforts were made to preserve it in its certain rigor. So that is how it is pronounced. So person in Kerala and person in Delhi and person in Gujarat would pronounce it in more or less the same way because of the system of shiksha. And chanda. Chanda is another Vedang, right? Or the limbs of Ved. Vedang is a paradigm of knowledge systems, which has got these 6 components to preserve, consolidate, explain Vedic oeuvre or Vedic text. Okay. Any other question? Okay, so now let us look at one great text from Upanishads called Ishavasya Upanishad, and I'm not going to kind of run it in full, but it's almost 20 mantra hai usme. So let's see. Okay, I'm sharing the screen now. Is this screen visible? Ishopanishad. And Upanishads are almost later parts of Vedic corpus, and they deal with philosophical and spiritual and metaphysical questions. While the earlier part of Brahmanas are largely about rituals, right? In Upanishads, we see that we are moving away from the world of rituals to world of spiritualism and metaphysical symbolism, right? And great philosophical inquiries. So let us take a look very quickly at the great Upanishad called the Ishopanishad. Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's take this.
ईशावास्यमिदं सर्वं यत्किञ्च जगत्यां जगत् तेन त्यक्तेन भुञ्जीथा मा वृधः कस्य स्विद्धनम् कुर्वन्नेवेह कर्माणि जिजीविषेच्छतं समाः एवं त्वयि नान्यथेतोऽस्ति न कर्म लिप्यते नरे असूर्यानाम ते लोका अन्धेन तमसा कृता तांस्ते प्रेत्याभिगच्छन्ति ये के चात्महनो जनाः अनेजदेकं मनसो जवियो नैन देवा आप्नुवन् पूर्वमर्षत् तद्धावतो अन्यान् अत्येति तिष्ठत् तस्मिन्नपो मातरिश्वा दधाति तदेजति तन्नैजति तद्दूरे तद्वन्तिके तदन्तरस्य सर्वस्य तदु सर्वस्यास्य बाह्यतः यस्तु सर्वाणि भूतानि आत्मन्येवानुपश्यति सर्वभूतेषु चात्मानं ततो न विजुगुप्सते यस्मिन् सर्वाणि भूतानि आत्मैवाभूद्विजानतः तत्र को मोहः कः शोक एकत्वमनुपश्यत सपर्यगाच्छुक्रमतायमव्रणम् अस्नाविरं शुद्धमपापविद्धम् कविर्मनीषी परिभूः स्वयंभू याथा तथ्यतो अर्थानि व्यदधात्मतीभ्यः अन्धन्तमः प्रविशन्ति ये अविद्यामुपासते ततो भूय इव ते तमो य विद्यायां रताः अन्यदेवाहुर्विद्यया अन्यदाहुरविद्यया इति शुश्रुमधीराणां ये न तद्विचक्षिरे विद्यां च अविद्यां च यस्तद्वेदो भयं सः अविद्यया मृत्युं तीर्त्वा विद्ययामृतमश्नुते अन्धन्तमः प्रविशन्ति ये असम्भूतिमुपासते ततो भूय इव ते तमो य सम्भूत्यां रताः अन्यदेवाहुः सम्भवात् अन्यदाहुरसम्भवात् इति शुश्रुमधीराणां ये न तद्विचक्षिरे सम्भूतिं च विनाशं च यस्तद्वेदो भयं सः विनाशेन मृत्युं तीर्त्वा सम्भूत्यामृतमश्नुते हिरण्मयेन पात्रेण सत्यस्यापिहितं मुखम् तत्त्वं पूषन्न पावृणु सत्यधर्माय दृष्टये पूषन्ने कर्षे यमसूर्यप्राजापत्यव्यूहरश्मीन् समूह तेजो यत्ते रूपं कल्याणतमस्तत्ते पश्यामि यो सावसौ पुरुषः सोऽहमस्मि वायुरनिलममृतम् अथेदं भस्मान्तं शरीरम् ॐ क्रतो स्मर कृतं स्मर क्रतो स्मर कृतं स्मर अग्नेनय सुपथाराये अस्मान् विश्वानि देव वयुनानि विद्वान् युयोध्यस्मज्जुहुराणमेनो भूयिष्ठान्ते नम उक्तिं विधेम
Okay. Okay, so let's now take a look at the English version of this. It's there in the material that I've sent you. So I want somebody to read this. So Ishavasya Upanishad is also called Ishopnishad. It's from the Vajrayana school of Shukla Yajurveda. Shukla Yajurveda is also called the dark Yajurveda, right? So from that there are various schools around each Samhita. So Vajrayana is one of the schools of interpretation and chanting and certain kind of belief systems associated with it, right? It derives its name from the opening words that Ishavasyamidam Sarvam. And I don't know if you have noticed the difference in Vedic Sanskrit and Upanishadic Sanskrit. I don't know. How many of you could sense that it was slightly different? I don't know. Okay. So I want somebody to read this for me. Who is going to read? Sanaya? Sanaya, can you read this? Can you read out loud? Anyone else wants to read this English version? Madhika or Drumi or Jaswin or Deepika, Udit. Anyone? Okay. Yeah, okay. If Sanaz is not working. Huh? BSM1. तो शौर्य ब्रह्मभट्ट से मिली है लास्ट। मुझे पता नहीं, अगर वो कोई वही पढ़ाते कब होते हैं तो कब आएंगे वो हमको तो नहीं बताएंगे ना। वो अंदर ऑफिस से मिल जाएगा आपको, अपने पल्लवी बेन है वहाँ पे, वहां से ले सकते हो। Yeah, so who is going to do it? Kirtan? Anyone? Pisha?
Whatever
yes,
moves in the world, pervasive of the Lord. Therefore, enjoy yourself even as you renounce, covet nothing, for whose wealth is this anyway? Desire. Doing your duty to live 100 years. Living thus, karma will not cling to you. There is no other way. They that kill themselves go after death to the
Not kill themselves. It's not kill themselves. They that kill the self.
Yes, sir. They that kill the self go after death to the worlds known as demonic, and covered by the darkness of the blind. The self is one unmoving yet moves faster than the mind. Even the gods cannot catch up with it, since it runs ahead. Standing still, it outruns those that run. The, the pervasive breath keeps the life of all things in the self. It moves not, is far away, yet near, within all this and outside all of this. He who sees all the beings in the self and sees the self in all beings does not abhor anything. For the wise, when all beings have become one with the self, how can there be anything delusive or sorrowful, since he sees the oneness of all life? The self is everywhere, radiant without a body, invaluable, sinless, pure, untainted by vice, witness of all and all knowing, who is above everything, self begotten, has through ended years created things duly as they are. Whoever is devoted to illusion passes into the darkness of the blind. Whoever delights in knowledge passes into a darkness still deeper. By knowledge, they say, is God something, by illusion something else. Thus have we heard from the wise who have explained this to us. He who knows both knowledge and illusion crosses death through illusion and enjoy life immortal through knowledge. Those who adore the unmanifest enter into the darkness of the blind, and those who delight in the manifest enter into a darkness deeper still. From the manifest, they say, is God something, from the unmanifest, something else. Thus have we heard from the wise who have explained this to us. He who knows both the manifest and the unmanifest, crossing death through the manifest, attains life immortal through the unmanifest. The face of truth is covered with a golden lid. Take, take it off, O sun, so that truth and dharma may be sighted. O sun, lone traveler, controller, and offspring of Brahma, recall your rays, gather up your radiance, so that I may see your most blessed form. Whoever is this is the person in there, I am him. May this life merge in immortal breath. May this body end in ashes. Remember, O mind, what were your deeds. Remember, O mind, what has been done. O fire, lead us on to prosperity by a good path. O God, the knower of all our deeds, take away from us deceitful vices. May we offer prayers to you in profusion.
Right. So now you can see that whole cluster of ideas get consolidated around the idea of self and something that is transcendental to self itself, right? So something called Atma and Brahma. Also, an idea of karma is something that seems to get consolidated in this very late Upanishad, Ishavasya, and it is a philosophical document associated with Shukla Yajurveda, right? What is interesting here is the whole idea of karma, right? That seems to become extremely important in the Vedic theology, as well as Buddhist and Jains. The idea of karma seems to be one of very important idea. And it means that whatever you do has its consequences, right? And if you die before getting all the consequences, which is usually the case, then you are reborn. So the cycle of birth and rebirth is an idea that is common to Jainism, common to Buddhism and the Vedic religion, right? Vedic Dharma. So this idea seems to emerge in this late Vedic text. Also, it is a kind of paradoxes that it speaks in, almost like Zen, right? It says that it moves and it moves not, is far away yet it is near, within all this and outside all this. He who sees all beings in the self and sees the self in all the beings does not abhor anything. And all these ideas get later on reflected in Mahabharata chapter, which we call Bhagavad Gita, which is a kind of summary of most of the important ideas from Upanishads, right? So it is said that Upanishads are the cows, and Krishna has milked those cows, and that milk is called Bhagavad Gita. That is the metaphor that is very often found in Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahakavya called Mahabharata. Right? And the self is everywhere radiant without a body, invulnerable, sinewless, pure, untainted by vice, witness of all and all knowing, who is above everything, self-begotten, yet through endless years created things duly as they are. All these ideas gave rise later on, maybe towards, I'm not, 4th century or 2nd century, I am not very sure, before Christ, in a text called Brahma Sutra Bhashya. I'm sorry, Brahma Sutra. So Brahma Sutra is one of the sutra texts, that is aphoristic text, which lays down a certain philosophical theory, right? So this sutra text includes things like Kama Sutra as well as Yoga Sutra, and even things like Natya Shastra and Artha Shastra, right? So Brahma Sutra is one of the important treatise that becomes a kind of center stone of what is called Advaita philosophy. And it becomes an important school towards 9th century, almost 1000 years after this Upanishad was composed, that Shankaracharya, commenting on both Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra, would come up with a theory of Advaita, which would become very popular in India. And this theory would have multiple interpretations later on. You would also find Dvaita school of philosophy, which emphasizes that man and God cannot be one and the same, ontologically the same. While this Shankaracharya school believed that man and the ultimate reality are ontologically same. Atman and Brahma, that is the ultimate reality, is ultimately the same. So there are various interpretations of this Advait Vedant. It's called Vedant, right? Upanishad, because towards the end of Vedic period or Vedic corpus, you find this philosophical theories emerging. And it speaks in paradoxes. See, it says that whoever is devoted to illusion passes on into the darkness of the blind, right? And whoever delights in knowledge passes into a darkness still deeper. And means even if you are ignorant, you will enter that darkness. And if you are wise, even then, you will enter the darkness, which is even deeper. So what exactly do these texts mean have given rise to various contradictory interpretations of the text, right? So it always speaks in these paradoxes, which are open to multiple interpretations. But you can see that the idea of self as ultimate reality seems to emerge here, which is not a very important thing in the early Vedic corpus, which is mostly about how to perform rituals properly and also about various kinds of prayers to various gods. This is a kind of theorization that has happened about the nature of self in the Upanishads. Right? Anything you have to say about this? Any question that comes to your mind? Any comment, observation? So this sample of these three texts, you have a kind of rough understanding of the Vedic corpus, right? So the two suktas, Nasadiya and Purush, and finally Ishavasyam. So these are the three important statements of Vedic literature. So what do you have to say about this? Have you read some of these things before? Have you heard of these things before? Or are you hearing these things for the first time?
Sir, I think whenever we're taught about the institution of caste, we're always shown this excerpt of the Purusha Sukta, but I've never heard it in its full context about the introduction of Yagna. But
it is not about caste per se. If you see, it's about Varna system, right? Which emphasizes that the social stratification should be done on the basis of your guna and karma, right? About your traits and your deeds. And whether it is by birth or whether it is by your traits and deeds has remained a kind of conflict on Indian subcontinent right from that period in which it was composed, or late Mahabharata at least, right? Mahabharata is about this conflict. If you ask me what is the basic conflict, it's not about two families fighting for the throne. It's about whether social order should be based on your traits and your deeds, guna and karma, or whether it should be based on your birth, right? And there are conflicting voices in Mahabharata which talks about these things, right? Even in Upanishads, like I forgot the name, Upanishads, you find a story of Satyakam Jabali, probably, yeah, who is a son of a maid servant, right? And he doesn't know the name of his father, and even his mother doesn't know who his father is, but he wants to earn knowledge, and that's why he approaches his acharya, and acharya asks him, what is your varna? To which he says that I don't know, because I don't know who my father is. To which the acharya says that you are Brahman because you spoke truth, right? And that's why you are entitled to this great knowledge, Brahma Vidya. So you can find that conflict goes on. In Mahabharata also you find Karna, story of Karna, who is, in the eyes of society, he is a son of Sut, or people who sung those narratives or drove chariots, right? But he has the traits of Kshatriya, right? And he is son of sun god, technically. So when he goes to learn, so Parshuram asks him, are you son of Brahmin? To which he lies, and he says that he is a Brahmin, because Parshuram has sworn that he will only teach Brahmins. But on the basis of his traits, and Parshuram makes out that he is not a Brahmin but Kshatriya. And that's why he curses him that whenever you need knowledge the most, you will forget it. I don't know if you have heard of these stories. Right? Right. And there is also
Yes,
this
sir.
story called Yaksha Prashna. Right. So when Pandavas were in exile, they came across a pond where they wanted to drink water. But as each of the Pandavas approach, Yaksha comes up and he says that you should answer my question. Only then I will allow you to drink water. So they disregard him and drink water, and he curses them to die. So finally it comes to Yudhishthira, who is supposed to be the epitome of dharma, right? He is Dharmaraj. and he answers all the questions to Yaksha. Yaksha is that divine being who lives in forest very often. So one of the questions that Yaksha asks Yudhishthira is that who is Brahmin? Is Brahmin person by birth, or is Brahmin who is one who is a scholar, or is Brahmin one who is very learned? To which Yudhishthira replies that Brahman is the one who has character. Learning and birth do not matter. Right? So all these dialogues that you find in Mahabharata later on reveal the kind of conflict around caste and Varna. Varna and Jati are all perpetually in conflict. And you have to look at it historically. Varna system is one of the earliest. Jati is a later development. And then you find it very difficult to accommodate both of these, right? Because both of these theories are incompatible. Varna, like Satyakam Jabali, becomes Brahmin because he speaks truth, that he doesn't have a father, right? He is a maid servant's daughter, son. So you can see that the whole conflict between Varna and Jati is one of the defining conflicts of Indian civilization and culture. And whenever we talk of origin of caste, we look at, as Jaswin points out, to this this Purusha Sukta. And later on, it's during the Gupta period, 3rd or 4th century, that you find a consolidated theories of Varna becoming rigid, right? And you have texts like Manav Dharma Shastra or Manusmriti, which is absolute kind of a hierarchical notion of society, right? And it also lays out different kind of punishments for people of different varnas. So it becomes a kind of a very oppressive text, right? So, but even then, the definition of varna versus jati continues. Dronacharya, who is a Brahmin by birth, is actually who should be in teaching, who is a teacher, but he enters the war battlefield, right? So he is actually flouting his swadharma by joining the battlefield. And so you can see that conflict continuously in Mahabharata. Yes. So you have to approach these things historically. Mahabharata is something from 300 BC to 300 AD. 600 साल में लिखा गया है वो. And it was composed by many people. It cannot be a work of single person. So tradition, religious belief says it's the work of Ved Vyasa, right? And it is part of what is known as Smruti tradition or Itihas Puran tradition. As against Vedic texts, all the 3 texts that we discussed today belong to Shruti texts, right? They are heard by the Rishis and they are not produced by Rishis. I hope there is no author to all these texts because they are eternal and they are apurusheya. So all the Rishis are people who can see what other people cannot see. So Rishi, according to Rigveda, is a Kavi, and Kavi is called Kranta Drashta, person who can see what others cannot. And what does he see? He sees these eternal utterances, the word, the Shabda, right? Which others cannot. So that's the story. Anything that you have to say about today's discussion?
No, sir.
Okay, so we have got around 5-10 minutes on our hand, and I think Kirtan has a presentation on Mahabharata. We have already started discussing that. That's why. Kirtan? Do you have 10 minutes presentation on Mahabharata? Are you ready with your presentation today?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So let us have your presentation.
Okay.
And then we will stop for today, right? After your presentation.
Sir, screen visible? Hello.
मेरे लिए विजिबल है.
Sir.
सर का नेट नहीं चल रहा है.
Can you start?
Yes,
I
sir.
lost my connection. Yeah.
So, sir, my topic Mahabharat hai. We talk about the Mahabharat. So, Mahabharat is the major Sanskrit epic of ancient. So, I will explain the topic according to this content. That is introduction about Mahabharat and about Ved Vyas. So, about the introduction. So, Mahabharat, it is the great epic of the birth two Sanskrit epic poems of ancient India. It's an important source of information on the development of Hinduism between 400 BC and 200 CE, and is regarded by Hindus as both a text about dharma and a history. Narrates the struggle between two groups of cousins in the Kurukshetra war and the fates of the Kaurava and Pandava princes and their successors. It also philosophical and devotional material such as discussion of the four goals or Purusharth. The Mahabharata is the longest epic poem known as and has been described as the longest poem ever written. The bulk of Mahabharata was probably compiled between 3rd century BC and 3rd century CE, with the oldest preserved parts not much older than 400 BC. The text probably reached its final form by the early Gupta period. Mahabharata is roughly 10 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, or about 4 times the length of Ramayana. The story of Damayanti, the story of Shakuntala, Urvashi, the story of Savitri and Satyavan, the story of Kacha and Devyani, and an abbreviated version of the Ramayana, often considered as works of their own right. About Mahabharata. So, the first section of Mahabharata states that it was Parisha who wrote down the text of Vyas' dictation. Most important characters can be said to be included are Krishna, Pandavas, Yudhishthir, Bhim, Arjun, Nakula, and Sahadev, along with their wife Draupadi. Gods play a significant role in the epic include Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva, Ganga, Indra, Surya, and Yama. The texts described by some early 20th century Indo-logistic as unstructured and chaotic. The background to the Mahabharata suggests the origin of epic occurs after the very early Vedic period and before. The first Indian empire was to rise in the 3rd century BC. Mahabharata started as an orally transmitted tale of the charioteer Bart. The Mahabharata itself distinguishes a core portion of 24,000 verses. At least three redaction of the text are commonly recognized. Jaya with 8,800 attributed to Vyas, Bharat with 24,000 verses as recited by Vaisampiyan, and finally the Mahabharata was recited by Ugra Sardip with over 1 lakh verses. References to Bharat and the compound Mahabharata date to Panini and the Asolayan Grihastha. The Kurukshetra war is unclear. Many historians estimate was to Iron Age of India of the 10th century BC. So now the preface of the Mahabharata is the core story of the work is that of a dynastic Hastinapur, the kingdom ruled by the Kuru clan. The two collateral branches of the family that participate in the struggle are the Kaurava and the Pandava. Although the Kaurava is the senior branch of the family, Duryodhana, the eldest Kaurava, is younger than Yudhishthir, the eldest Pandava. Both Duryodhana and Yudhishthir claim to be the first in the line to inherit the throne. The struggle culminates in the great battle of Kurukshetra, in which the Pandavas are ultimately victorious. The battle produces complex conflicts to kingship and friendship, instances of family, loyalty, and duty taking place over what is right as well as the concern. The Mahabharata itself ends with the death of Krishna and the subsequent end of his dynasty and ascent of the Pandava brothers to the heaven. It also marks the beginning of the Hindu age of Kali Yuga, fourth and the final age of humankind, in which great values and noble ideas have crumbled, and people are heading towards the complete dissolution of right action, morality, and virtue. Now, facts of Mahabharata are Mahabharata was written by Maharshi Vedas, known as fifth Ved scripture, and is a valuable asset of Hindu culture. Epic, which has a total of 1 lakh slok, and therefore known as Saptasahasra Samhita. To predict future, astrologer depend upon constellation, as during Mahabharata times there were no sun sign. Rohini was in the first place of the constellation, not Ashwini. The Mahabharata story has been retold in written and oral Sanskrit and vernacular version throughout South and Southeast Asia. Its various incidents have been portrayed in stone, not sculptured reliefs, at Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom in Cambodia, and in Indian miniature paintings. The battle raged for 18 days. The army totaled 18 Akshuhinis, 7 on the Pandava side and 11 on the Kaurav side. So 1 Akshuni is equals to 21,000 chariots, 21,000 elephants, and 65,000 horses, and around 1,10,000 soldiers. So I like to end my presentation by picking one slok from Mahabharata, that is Karmanya Vati Kaste Ma Phaleshu Kadachan Ma Karma Phalhentu Murgha Ta Sangostva Karmani. That means you have the right to perform your action, but not let the fruit be the purpose of your action, and therefore you won't be attached to not doing your duty. So thank you. My presentation is over.
Slok that you recited, taken from? Do you have any idea?
सर सुना नहीं दिया आप
Do you
प्लीज
know?
रिपीट करो.
The last slok that you recited, which part of Mahabharata is it taken from?
Sir, I don't know, but I have searched Google it, and then I have find that this shlok is taken from Mahabharata.
So you tell me which part of Mahabharata it is taken from.
Sir, I don't know. Sorry, sir.
Anyone else knows? किसी को पता है?
I think it's taken from Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
Pardon, I can't hear you clearly, Twisha.
I think, I'm not sure though, but I think it is taken from Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
Can't hear you clearly. You can type it because there is some problem with your audio. You were saying something, Twisha? Yes. What were you saying? No idea. Last room में होते. Twisha, you can put it in the chat box.
I did.
सुना ही नहीं दिया इसलिए चैट बॉक्स में कैसे देख सकते हैं कॉल मैसेज. Yes, exactly. It's from Bhagavad Gita. Good. Okay, so we are going to stop for today. Tomorrow also we'll meet probably at the same time for the extra classes, right? Because there are some classes that we lost, and that's why we are lagging behind in the syllabus. So tomorrow I will also explain you about the projects that you have to do, which is a 20 marks question, right? Along with, and those people whose presentations are left, you can do that tomorrow, right? Is that okay? So we meet tomorrow at the same time, right? So see you tomorrow then.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Have a good day.